This is Ground Affected.
My name is Brent, and welcome to the bottom of my well. Now put your lotion on. Recently, Genesis asked me if I would paint one of his miniatures.
Who is Genesis?
Genesis has been a good supporter and friend of the channel since day one, long before I even started making YouTube videos. He is an amazing sculptor and he runs a Patreon called C27 Collectibles, where they make miniatures with very funny names. And so, Jen asked me if I would paint one of his models for him, and of course I naturally obliged. So this video will be the process of me painting a model the size of my thumb. Also, very quickly before we get into the video, click like, click subscribe, just leave a comment about what breakfast you had, because this channel could do with all of that interaction to help boost us to get to more viewers. And if you feel like by the end of the video I haven't earned your subscription, you can just follow the instructions that I leave you at the end of the video. So let's get straight into the process of painting Satellite Winters. I decided I'm going to start with the Zenithal base, which I think maybe was a mistake, but I ended up working with it anyway. Zenithal is a black prime with a white spread over the top. This helps bring out the volumes and gives you a bit more information to use when you're painting the item later on. Working on the base, I'm going to use a mixture of black, white, blue and yellow, and I'm going to just sort of smear them all over the place. This is just to give a bit more saturation and color and life to the base. I don't want just grey rocks, that's rather boring. Dry brushing the edges of that with a lighter version of grey, and then placing Drakenhof Nightshade, which is a blue wash, and Reiklin Flesh Shade, which is a sort of reddish, orangey, brownish kind of wash. I used a metallic red to paint the inside of the emblem, and I painted the rim black, and then I dry brushed with a little bit of a yellowish brown to the tips of the rocks facing the front of this base. I mixed a bit of white into that brown to give it a bit of a highlight and did that over the second layer, and then I used a white and I went around the edges and just highlighted the edges of the rocks just to create a little bit more depth. I used pigment powders to tie everything together on the bottom of the base and make it look a little bit more dusty. Working on the main character, I'm going to use an ink. This is one of the first times that I've used an ink for something like this. What's special about an ink is the fact that it is a translucent color, so the darker areas from the Zenithal will be darker and the lighter areas will be light. This gives us a good starting base for our highlights and shadows on the model. I painted the darker skin tone over all the exposed skin, and then painted the guns silver. I used a light silver because I'm going to wash these later and this will dull the finish quite a bit. I made a mistake using Iandan yellow for painting his feet, but I did it anyway and I ended up having to cover that up. I then washed the guns and I started working on highlights on the rest of the suit. This was done using a lighter blue, and I basically just thinned this quite a bit so it would flow easy, and I went over all the high spots where the light would hit the model. I did this highlighting in multiple layers, slowly adding white to the mix of blue that I had and working my way up. This was just the start of the layers for this. I did a similar thing with the skin tones, using a lighter skin tone and a very watered down paint. I started building up highlights on the skin tones itself. I then carried on painting all the base coats on all the brown straps that are all across his body. And since it's Marvel, there's a lot of straps and a lot of pouches. Carefully working on the next layer of highlights, I'm going to slowly add a bit of white into the colors I'm using and start to build them up to get a greater contrast between the lightest color and the darkest color. I worked small white lines into his hair just to create a bit of volume and make it look a little bit more lifelike, and added edge highlights to all of the guns. This was already around 3 to 4 hours worth of work, and now was time to start all the main details. And this is where I'm going to start tightening things up, and I'm going to go through and layer over layer over layer. In reality, this kind of painting is not competition standard. It's something what we would call display standard, where it would look great as a display piece on a shelf, but it's not something that has had hundreds of hours spent on it to make it look immaculate in order to win a competition. In miniatures, it's quite often that you will find painters will paint to different standards according to the budgets of their commissioners. I spent around 7 hours working on this piece. If I were to paint it to competition standard, I would probably give myself around 30 to 50 hours to work on something like this, possibly even more. It's the time that you take layering layers over each other to create smoother blends and put as much detail into the tiniest of areas as you possibly can. And towards the end here, you can see me slowly building up some of those final layers. The more you work on it, the more you can see things that need to be tidied, the more you can see things that you can clean up. And in this last section of the video, you'll see me putting in the final little details, which is what takes the model from being tabletop standard into display standard. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and of course, if you've made it this far, there's only one thing left to do, and that's to thank my patrons. Yes, I have a Patreon, and if you want to be part of the coolest people on the entire internet, you probably want to join the Patreon, where you will get access to a private Discord where I chat with most of my patrons, sometimes daily. But more importantly, you will know that you are supporting the channel in one of the best ways you possibly can, because how else will we keep these lights blinding my eyes? Also, we have got to the end of the video, and there is only one thing left to do. Even though we know YouTube has taken away the dislike count, you could still just click dislike and off, bruh, because even a dislike counts as an interaction, and I appreciate all the interactions you want to give me.